The trust fund secret. On my 25th birthday, I sat across from Grandpa William at his favorite corner table in Romano's Italian restaurant. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the checkered tablecloth. Grandpa had insisted on taking me out alone, without the rest of the family, which was unusual but not unwelcome. He was 82 years old, still sharp as a tack, with silver hair neatly combed back and kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His hands, weathered from years of hard work, rested on the table as he watched me finish my tiramisu. "Emma," he said, his voice warm and gentle, "I have a question for you." I looked up, curious. Grandpa always had interesting questions, the kind that made you think about life in new ways. "How do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund?" I blinked at him, my fork halfway to my mouth. The restaurant noise seemed to fade into the background. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel confusion washing over me like a cold wave. "What trust fund?" I asked slowly, setting my fork down carefully. Grandpa's smile faded slightly, and I saw concern flicker across his weathered face. He leaned forward, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "The trust fund I set up for you when you were born. Your parents were supposed to tell you about it when you turned 18. My mind raced. I was 25 years old. 7 years had passed since I should have known about this. I thought back to all the struggles of the past 7 years. Working 2 jobs to put myself through community college, living in a tiny studio apartment with a leaky ceiling, eating ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I cared to count. "Grandpa," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I don't know anything about a trust fund. Mom and Dad never mentioned it." Not once. The color drained from his face. He suddenly looked every one of his 82 years. His hand reached across the table and gripped mine, and I could feel it shaking slightly. "Emma, sweetheart, are you telling me the truth? You've never accessed that money? Never used it for college, for living expenses, for anything?" I shook my head, tears beginning to well up in my eyes. "I worked at the diner and the bookstore to pay for school. I'm still paying off student loans. I drive that old Honda that breaks down every other month. Grandpa, I promise you, I don't know anything about any trust fund." He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow that I had never seen before. "We need to talk to your parents," he said quietly. "Right now." The drive to my parents' house was silent. Grandpa sat in the passenger seat of his pristine 1987 Cadillac, which he had insisted on driving, his jaw set in a firm line. I followed behind in my sputtering Honda, my mind spinning with questions. $3,400,000. That kind of money could have changed everything. I could have gone to a 4-year university instead of community college. I could have studied abroad like I'd always dreamed. I could have helped my friend Sarah when her mother got sick, and she had to drop out of school because she couldn't afford both tuition and medical bills. But more than the money itself, what hurt was the betrayal. Why would my parents keep this from me? We pulled up to the modest 2-story house where I grew up. The lawn needed mowing, and the paint was peeling slightly around the windows. It was early Saturday evening, and I knew my parents would be home. Dad's truck was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in the kitchen. Grandpa knocked firmly on the front door. I stood beside him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My mother, Carol, opened the door. She was 53, with brown hair she kept short and practical, wearing her usual weekend outfit of jeans and a comfortable sweater. Her smile of greeting froze when she saw our faces. "William," she said to Grandpa, her voice careful. "Emma, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "We need to talk, Carol," Grandpa said, his voice steady but cold in a way I had never heard before. "Now, is Robert home?" "I'm here, Dad," my father said, appearing behind Mom in the doorway. He was 55, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing his reading glasses pushed up on his head. What's going on? Let us in, Grandpa said. We moved to the living room, the same room where I had grown up, where I had learned to walk, where we had celebrated countless Christmases and birthdays. The familiar beige couch, the family photos on the wall, the bookshelf my dad had built himself, all of it suddenly felt strange and unfamiliar. Grandpa remained standing, so did I. My parents sat on the couch, and I could see Mom's hands twisting together in her lap. I just asked Emma how she spends her trust fund, Grandpa said, his voice quiet but firm. She told me she doesn't know anything about it. I need you to explain to me right now why my granddaughter has been struggling for the past 7 years when she has over $3 million sitting in an account with her name on it. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents' faces, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There was guilt there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like defiance. We were going to tell her, Mom said weakly. When? Grandpa's voice rose slightly. She's 25 years old. The trust became accessible to her at 18. That was 7 years ago, Carol. Dad stood up, his jaw tight. We had our reasons, Dad. Good reasons. Then I'd like to hear them, Grandpa said, because from where I'm standing, you've been lying to your daughter for 7 years and keeping her in poverty while she worked herself to exhaustion. We weren't keeping her in poverty, Mom said, her voice rising defensively. She had a roof over her head when she needed it. She had food. We helped her when we could. You helped her with grocery money and a used car while she had millions of dollars you were keeping from her, Grandpa said, his voice shaking now. Explain it to me. Make me understand. Dad took a deep breath. We didn't want the money to ruin her. We've seen what happens to young people who come into money too early. They don't learn the value of hard work. They don't develop character. We wanted Emma to become a responsible, hard-working person before she knew about the trust fund. I finally found my voice. You wanted me to become responsible? I've been responsible my entire life. I worked 2 jobs through college. I've never asked you for anything I didn't absolutely need. I've been responsible since I was 16 years old and got my first job. Exactly, Mom said, turning to look at me with tears in her eyes. And that's because you didn't know about the money. If you had known, would you have worked so hard? Would you have developed such a strong work ethic? That wasn't your decision to make. I felt my voice breaking. That was my money. Grandpa set it up for me. You had no right to keep it from me. We're your parents, Dad said. We had every right to make decisions about your welfare. Where did it go? Grandpa asked suddenly, his voice sharp. Emma never accessed the account, so where is the money? The silence that followed was different, heavier. I watched my parents exchange a look, and my stomach sank even further. Some of it is still there. Dad said finally. How much? Grandpa asked. Another long pause. About 400,000, Mom whispered. The number hit me like a physical blow. $3 million. Gone. I felt dizzy and reached out to steady myself on the back of a chair. You stole from your own daughter, Grandpa said, and his voice was hollow now, shocked. You stole $3 million from Emma. We didn't steal, Dad said quickly. We invested it. We used it for family expenses. We put your grandsons through college. My brothers? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You used my money to pay for Michael and David's college? Michael was 28, David was 30. They had both gone to expensive private universities. They had both studied abroad. They both graduated debt-free and now had successful careers. Michael was a lawyer, David worked in finance. They had nice apartments in the city, new cars, wardrobes full of expensive clothes. And I had worked at a diner serving coffee at 5 in the morning and shelved books until midnight, eating cereal for dinner because it was all I could afford, wearing secondhand clothes, driving a car that barely ran. We gave them opportunities, Mom said. Good schools, good connections. We set them up for success. With Emma's money, Grandpa said. Money that wasn't yours to spend. Money I specifically set aside for her future. They're family, Dad said. We believe in taking care of all our children equally. Then why didn't you tell me? I asked, tears streaming down my face now. Why didn't you ask me? Why didn't you give me the choice? Because you would have said no, Mom said quietly. You would have wanted to keep it all for yourself. The accusation hung in the air. After everything they had done, they were trying to make me seem selfish for wanting my own money. You're right, I said, my voice cold. I probably have said no to giving away $3 million. But you know what I would have said yes to? Paying for my own education, living in an apartment without mold in the bathroom, being able to help my friends when they needed it, having the security of knowing I had something to fall back on if things went wrong. We gave you character, Dad said. We gave you the gift of knowing you can survive on your own, that you can work hard and succeed without having everything handed to you. You gave me anxiety, I said. You gave me sleepless nights wondering how I was going to pay rent. You gave me the shame of having to ask you for help with groceries while my brothers got everything they wanted. You gave me the experience of watching my best friend drop out of school because she couldn't afford it while you were spending my money to make sure Michael and David never had to worry about anything. Grandpa was looking at my parents with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was beyond anger. It was disappointment so deep it seemed to age him before my eyes. I need to sit down, he said quietly, and I rushed to help him to a chair. His hand was ice cold. Dad, are you okay? Mom asked, concern breaking through her defensiveness. No, Carol, I'm not okay, he said. I'm sitting here listening to my daughter and son-in-law explain to me how they stole millions of dollars from their own child and somehow convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. We were protecting her, Mom insisted. From what? From having choices, from having security, from having the future I worked my entire life to give her? Grandpa's voice cracked. I built my business from nothing. I worked 60-hour weeks for 40 years. I saved and invested and went without so that I could leave something for my grandchildren. I set up trusts for all three of them, Carol. Michael and David got theirs at 18, just like they were supposed to. Why was Emma different? Another heavy silence. Because she's a girl? I asked suddenly, the realization hitting me like a truck. Is that why? Because Michael and David could be trusted with money, but I couldn't? That's not fair, Dad said. Isn't it? The boys got their money at 18. They got to use it for college, for apartments, for whatever they wanted. But mine got held back, and then most of it got spent on them anyway. How is that not about me being a girl? It wasn't about gender, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what was it about? I demanded. Tell me the real reason. Dad sank back onto the couch, and suddenly he looked much older. You were always the sensitive one, he said quietly. Always dreaming, always reading, always wanting to travel and experience things. We were afraid the money would make you impractical, that you'd waste it on art classes and backpacking through Europe and never settle down to a real career. So you decided for me, I said. You decided that my dreams weren't worth my own money. That Michael could be trusted to become a lawyer and David could be trusted to go into finance. But Emma needed to be forced to be practical. We wanted you to have a stable life, Mom said, tears running down her face now. I could have had a stable life with $3 million, I shouted. I could have had any life I wanted. That was the whole point of Grandpa setting up the trust fund. Grandpa stood up slowly. He looked exhausted. I need the account information, he said to Dad, all of it. I'm going to talk to my lawyer first thing Monday morning. Dad, you can't be serious, Mom said. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, Grandpa said quietly. I'm not sure what you are right now, Carol, but you're not the daughter I raised. He turned to me. Emma, let's go. You shouldn't have to be here right now. I followed him out without looking back at my parents. Behind us, I could hear Mom starting to cry and Dad saying something in a low voice, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to hear any more explanations or excuses. We sat in Grandpa's car in the driveway for a long moment. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I couldn't quite catch my breath. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Grandpa said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is my fault. I should have checked. I should have made sure you knew about the trust fund. I just assumed your parents would do the right thing." "It's not your fault," I said. "You trusted them. So did I." "Where are you living now?" he asked. "I have an apartment about 20 minutes from here. It's small, but it's mine." "Pack a bag," he said. "You're staying with me tonight. We'll figure this out together." I wanted to protest, to say I could take care of myself, but the truth was I didn't want to be alone. I nodded. That night, I lay in the guest room of Grandpa's house, staring at the ceiling. This was the room I had stayed in countless times as a child, during sleepovers and family gatherings. The wallpaper had faded blue flowers, and the bed had the same soft quilt it had always had. Everything was familiar, but everything had changed. $3,400,000. Even the number felt unreal. I tried to imagine what my life could have been like. The education I could have had, the opportunities, the ability to help others, the security. But more than the money, it was the betrayal that hurt. My parents had looked me in the eye for 7 years while I struggled, while I worked myself to exhaustion, while I stressed about every unexpected expense. They had let me believe I was on my own, that I had to fight for everything, when all along I had resources they were keeping from me. And they had spent it on my brothers. Michael and David, who had always been the golden children, who could do no wrong, who got praised for their ambition while I was told to be more practical. I thought about all the times I had asked my parents for advice about money, about careers, about my future. All the times they had encouraged me to be frugal, to work hard, to not expect handouts. All of it had been a lie, not just an omission but an active deception maintained year after year. The next morning, Grandpa made breakfast, pancakes just like he used to make when I was little. We ate in his sunny kitchen and slowly we started to talk. "Tell me about your life," he said. "Tell me what the past 7 years have really been like." So I did. I told him about working the early morning shift at the diner, about Mrs. Henderson who always left a generous tip, and asked about my classes. I told him about the bookstore, about organizing inventory late at night while studying for exams. I told him about my studio apartment, with its temperamental heater, and the landlord who kept promising to fix things but never did. I told him about community college, about the professors who encouraged me, about the classes I loved. I told him about wanting to major in art history, but choosing business instead because it seemed more practical, more likely to lead to a stable job. I told him about my friends, about Sarah whose mother got cancer and who had to drop out to work full-time, about Jake who was still paying off student loans that would take him decades to clear, about Maria who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford her own apartment. I told him about the times I had gone to bed hungry because I had spent my food money on textbooks, about the winter my heat got shut off, and I slept in layers of clothes and every blanket I owned, about the time my car broke down and I walked 3 miles to work in the rain because I couldn't afford a taxi. Grandpa listened to all of it, and I watched tears run down his weathered cheeks. "You should never have had to live like that," he said when I finished. "That was never what I intended. I wanted you to have choices, Emma. I wanted you to have freedom and security." "I know, Grandpa. We're going to fix this," he said firmly. "I promise you we're going to make this right." On Monday morning, we went to see Grandpa's lawyer, a woman named Margaret Chen who had worked with him for 30 years. She listened to everything, taking notes, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. "This is a clear case of fiduciary breach," she said when we finished. "Your parents were named as trustees, with the explicit instruction to inform you of the trust at 18 and transfer full control to you. They violated that trust by concealing the fund's existence and by using the money for purposes other than your benefit." "What can we do?" I asked. "We can pursue legal action," Margaret said. "We can demand full accounting of where the money went, and we can seek to recover as much as possible. The challenge is that some of it may have been spent in ways that make recovery difficult. What do you mean? Grandpa asked. If they used it to pay for the son's education, those expenses have already been incurred. We can't reverse a degree that's already been earned. However, we can potentially seek restitution from the sons themselves, and we can certainly pursue legal consequences for your daughter and son-in-law. I don't want to go after my brothers, I said quickly. They didn't know. This isn't their fault. Margaret looked at me thoughtfully. That's generous of you, Emma, but they directly benefited from money that was stolen from you. However, that's a decision you can make later. For now, let's focus on the immediate steps. Over the next few weeks, the situation unfolded in ways I never could have imagined. Margaret filed legal papers. My parents were forced to provide complete accounting of the trust fund. And the truth that emerged was even worse than I had thought. Not only had they paid for Michael and David's college education with my money, but they had also used it for a down payment on Michael's first house. They had invested some in David's business startup. They had taken family vacations that I hadn't been invited on. They had bought a new car for Mom. All told, of the $3,400,000 that should have been mine, only $375,000 remained. I sat in Margaret's office, looking at the detailed accounting, and I felt numb. Over $3 million. Gone. There's more, Margaret said gently. I need you to prepare yourself. What else could there possibly be? I asked. The remaining money in the trust fund. Your parents attempted to withdraw it last week. I felt the room spin. What? When they realized we were pursuing legal action, they tried to empty the account. Fortunately, I had already moved to freeze the assets, so the transaction was blocked. But the attempt was made. They had tried to take the last of my money. Even after everything, even knowing they were caught, they had tried to take what little remained. I want them prosecuted, I said, my voice hard. I want the full weight of the law brought against them. Grandpa reached over and took my hand. Are you sure, sweetheart? That's your parents. Once we go down that road, there's no coming back. They made that choice, I said. Not me. They made it 7 years ago when they decided to lie to me. They made it every day since then. And they made it last week when they tried to steal the last of my money, Margar. Aunt nodded. I'll proceed with filing criminal charges. The news spread through the family quickly. My brothers called me, shocked and confused. Michael left a voicemail, his voice shaking, saying he had no idea, that he thought Mom and Dad had saved up for his education. David sent a long email explaining that he had always wondered how our parents could afford so much, but had never questioned it directly. My aunts and uncles weighed in. Some sided with my parents, saying I was being vindictive, that family should forgive. Others were horrified and offered their support. Grandpa's house became a gathering place for those who wanted to help, who wanted to understand. Through it all, my parents maintained that they had done what they thought was best. In court documents, their lawyer argued that they had acted within their rights as trustees, that the trust language had been ambiguous, that they had made good faith decisions about what was in my best interest. Margaret tore those arguments apart. The trust language was crystal clear. There was nothing ambiguous about inform the beneficiary at age 18 and transfer full control. There was nothing good faith about spending $3 million on other people while keeping the beneficiary in poverty. The legal process was slow and painful. There were depositions and hearings and meetings. I had to recount again and again the details of my financial struggles while my parents sat across from me, their faces carefully blank, but something else was happening too. As the story got out, as people learned what had happened, I started receiving unexpected support. Mrs. Henderson from the diner, the woman who had always left generous tips, read about the case in the local newspaper. She showed up at Grandpa's house with a casserole and an envelope containing $500. I don't have much, she said, her weather. Ed face kind, but you were always good to me, and I want to help. I tried to refuse, but she insisted. Take it, she said. Use it for something that makes you happy. Buy art supplies, go see a movie, whatever brings you joy. My old college professors reached out. One of them, Dr. Patricia Williams, who had taught my art history class, offered me a job as a research assistant. I've secured a grant, she explained, and I need someone with your eye for detail and your passion for art. The pay isn't amazing, but it's steady, and it'll give you experience in the field you actually love. Sarah, my friend who had dropped out to care for her sick mother, called me crying. I should have known something was wrong, she said. All those times you said you couldn't afford things, and your parents drove nice cars and your brothers had everything. I should have seen it. How could you have known? I asked. I didn't even know. I'm so sorry, Em, for everything you went through. Jake and Maria, my other close friends, organized a fundraiser. Not because I needed money now, but because, as Jake explained, you spent years helping all of us when you had nothing. You shared your food, your books, your time. You drove us places in that terrible car even though you could barely afford gas. This is us saying thank you. The fundraiser raised $8,000, and my friends presented it to me with a card signed by dozens of people I had worked with, studied with, lived alongside. The card was full of memories I had forgotten, the time I had helped a classmate with rent when she was going to be evicted, the countless times I had covered someone's shift at work so they could go to a family event, the study groups I had organized to help struggling students. You were rich all along, Maria said, hugging me tight. Just not in the way your parents thought mattered. The Lega L case moved toward resolution, faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of serious criminal charges. My parents agreed to a settlement. They would pay back the remaining balance of the trust fund, plus interest. They would use their retirement savings, take out loans against their house, whatever it took. The total would come to about $800,000, less than a third of what they had taken, but it was something. More importantly, they would face consequences. There would be fines, community service, and a permanent record of what they had done. Michael and David, after much soul-searching, agreed to contribute as well. They couldn't give back the education they had received, but they could help make restitution. We didn't know, Michael told me when we finally spoke face-to-face. I swear, Emma, we had no idea. If we had known, we would have said something. We would have stopped it. I believe you, I said, and I did. My brothers were many things, but they weren't thieves. They had been as deceived as I was, just in a different way. Grandpa worked with Margaret to restructure what remained of my trust fund and what was recovered from my parents. He also made additional arrangements. I'm not going to live forever, he said one evening as we sat on his porch watching the sunset, and I've been thinking about what I want to leave behind. I'm changing my will. You're getting the house, Emma, and an additional trust fund that your parents won't have any access to. Grandpa, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do. I failed you once by trusting the wrong people. I won't fail you again. You never failed me, I said, tears in my eyes. You gave me the most important thing anyone ever has. What's that? You believed in me. You thought I deserved to have a future, to have choices, to have security. That belief, that love, that's what the TR US fund really was, and nobody could take that away. He pulled me into a hug, and we sat there as the sky turned orange and purple and finally dark. Months passed. The legal proceedings concluded. I received a settlement of $800,000, carefully placed in accounts with strict protections and oversight. It wasn't the $3 million I should have had, but it was a new beginning. I made decisions carefully, thoughtfully. I paid off my student loans. I bought a reliable car, nothing fancy, just something that would start every morning without a prayer. I moved into a better apartment, one with heat that worked and a landlord who fixed things. I went back to school, this time for art history, the degree I had always wanted. Dr. Williams helped me apply for graduate programs, and I got into a good one with funding, but I also remembered where I came from. I set up a scholarship fund at my community college for students in financial need. I donated to the medical fund that had been set up for Sarah's mother. I helped Jake and Maria and other friends who were still struggling. I didn't tell my parents about any of this. We hadn't spoken since the settlement. They had sent letters, trying to explain, trying to apologize, but I wasn't ready. Maybe someday I would be. Maybe someday I could forgive them. But not yet. Michael and David and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It was awkward at first, full of guilt and shame and unspoken pain. But we were brothers and sister, and that meant something. "I'm going to make this right," Michael said. "I don't know how, but I will." "You already are," I told him. "By being honest about what happened, by not making excuses, by being here." 2 years after that birthday dinner at Romano's, I sat once again in Grandpa's kitchen. I was 27 now, halfway through my graduate program, working as a teaching assistant, and loving every minute of it. I had just returned from a research trip to Italy, studying Renaissance art in person, a dream I had thought would never be possible. "You're glowing," Grandpa said, smiling as he poured coffee. "I'm happy," I said simply. "Really, genuinely happy." "That's all I ever wanted for you," he said. "That's what the trust fund was supposed to give you. Not just money, but the freedom to find your happiness." "I found it anyway," I said. "It just took a harder road." "You're stronger for it," he observed. "Though I wish you hadn't had to be." "Maybe," I said, "but I learned something important. I learned that my worth isn't tied to money, or what my parents think of me or anyone else's expectations. I learned that I can survive hard things. I learned who my real friends are. I learned what really matters." "And what really matters?" Grandpa asked. "This," I said, gesturing around his cozy kitchen. "Coffee with you on a Saturday morning. Friends who show up when things are hard. Work that makes my heart sing. The chance to help others. That's what matters." Grandpa reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," he said, his eyes twinkling, "when I set up that trust fund 27 years ago, I thought I was giving you money. But you just taught me that what I really gave you was something else entirely." "What's that?" "The knowledge that you deserve good things. That you're worth investing in. Even when it took you a while to access the actual money, that knowledge was there in the back of your mind. I believed in you enough to set aside millions of dollars for your future. That belief had value too." I thought about that. He was right. Even in my darkest moments, even when I was eating cereal for dinner and walking 3 miles to work, some part of me had known I deserved better. Some part of me had kept pushing forward, kept believing that things could improve. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said. "For everything. For the trust fund, yes, but more for believing I was worth it. Always," he said. "You were always worth it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our coffee as morning light filled the kitchen. Outside, birds sang in the trees Grandpa had planted when he first bought the house 50 years ago. Inside, I felt a peace I hadn't known I was missing. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Her mother was in remission, now, and Sarah had been able to return to school with help from the scholarship fund I had set up. The text was a photo of her in her cap and gown. She was graduating next month. "Looks like someone else is finding their happy ending," Grandpa observed, looking over my shoulder at the photo. "Thanks to you," I said. "The scholarship fund wouldn't exist without what you gave me." "No," he corrected gently. "It exists because of who you are. I gave you money. You chose to share it, to help others, to make a difference. That was all you, Emma." Another text came through, this time from Dr. Williams. She had nominated me for a prestigious fellowship, and I had been selected. A full year in Florence, studying and researching with some of the best art historians in the world. "Grandpa," I said, showing him the message, "I got the fellowship." His face lit up. "Florence." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." "I'm actually going to do it," I said, feeling tears of joy. "I'm going to live in Italy and study art and have the life I always dreamed about." "You certainly are," he said proudly, "and you're going to be brilliant at it." That evening, I drove to my apartment and found an envelope slipped under my door. It was from my mother. Inside was a letter, several pages long, handwritten on her familiar stationery. I sat on my couch for a long time before I opened it. When I finally did, I read it slowly. She wrote about her own childhood, about growing up poor, about watching her mother struggle to make ends meet. She wrote about her fear that wealth would make me soft, would rob me of the strength she had learned through hardship. She wrote about the shame she felt now, about understanding too late that she had confused deprivation with character building. She wrote that she was in therapy, that she was trying to understand why she had done what she did. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know that she was sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. She ended the letter with a line that broke my heart. I wanted to protect you from becoming spoiled, and instead I stole your choices. I thought I was being a good mother, and instead I was a thief. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I wasn't ready to respond, but I was glad she had written it. It was a start. Over the next few months, I prepared for my year in Florence. I took Italian lessons. I read everything I could about Renaissance art. I met with Dr. Williams to plan my research project, and I started to heal. The anger that had consumed me began to ease. I was still hurt, still dealing with the betrayal, but I was also moving forward. I was building a life I loved, and that was its own kind of victory. The night before I left for Italy, Grandpa threw a party at his house. All my friends came: Sarah, Jake, Maria, Dr. Williams, Mrs. Henderson from the diner, Margaret the lawyer, even some of my old coworkers. Michael and David came too, bearing gifts and good wishes. To Emma, Grandpa said, raising his glass, who taught us all that strength isn't about how much money you have, but about how you face adversity and how you treat others. We're so proud of you. Everyone cheered, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. These people, this strange patchwork family I had assembled from coworkers and professors and friends and chance encounters, they had carried me through the hardest time of my life. As the party wound down and people started to leave, Grandpa pulled me aside. He handed me a small wrapped package. "Open it on the plane," he said. "It's for when you need a reminder of home." I hugged him tight. "I love you, Grandpa. Thank you for everything." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now go have an adventure. Make art and memories and a life that makes you happy." The next day, I boarded a plane to Italy. Once we were in the air and the seatbelt sign turned off, I opened Grandpa's gift. It was a leather journal, beautiful and expensive, with my initials embossed on the cover. Inside the front cover, he had written a note. "Dear Emma, this journal is for recording your adventures, your thoughts, your discoveries. Fill it with everything that makes your heart sing. Remember always that you are loved, you are valued, and you deserve every good thing life has to offer. Your worth was never in the trust fund. It was always in you. With all my love, Grandpa." I held the journal to my chest and looked out the window at the clouds below. Somewhere down there was the life I had known, with all its struggles and betrayals and hard-won lessons. And somewhere ahead was the life I was flying toward, full of possibility and promise. I opened the journal to the first blank page and began to write. Today I begin again. The year in Florence was transformative. I studied art that took my breath away. I made friends from around the world. I learned to speak Italian with a decent accent. I ate pasta and gelato and pizza made by nonnas who had been perfecting their recipes for decades. I walked ancient streets and felt history alive around me. I wrote in the journal Grandpa gave me, filling page after page with observations and sketches and reflections. I wrote about the art I saw, the people I met, the ways I was changing and growing. I also wrote about forgiveness, about how I was slowly, tentatively beginning to understand my parents' choices, even if I couldn't excuse them, about how hurt and anger were exhausting to carry, and how I was ready to set them down. I called Grandpa every week, and I could hear in his voice how happy he was that I was happy. "You sound different," he observed one day. "Lighter." I feel lighter, I agreed. I think I'm finally letting go of the weight I've been carrying. Good, he said. You deserve to be free. Halfway through my year, I received word that my mother wanted to visit. She had saved up money, was planning to come to Florence if I would allow it. She wanted to see where I was living, what I was doing. She wanted to talk. I thought about it for a long time before I agreed. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray, new lines around her eyes and mouth. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. We talked for hours. She told me more about her childhood, about her fears and insecurities. I told her about my experiences, about what the past few years had been like for me. We cried. We argued gently. We listened to each other in ways we never had before. "I was so wrong," she said finally. "I was so wrong about everything. I thought I was teaching you to be strong, but you were already strong. I thought money would ruin you, but you've shown me that character isn't about what you have or don't have. It's about who you are, and you've always been remarkable." I needed to hear that, I said. Not just the apology, but the recognition that I was always okay the way I was. "You were better than okay," she said. "You were extraordinary, and I couldn't see it because I was too busy projecting my own fears onto you." We didn't solve everything in that conversation. Years of hurt don't heal in a single afternoon. But it was a beginning. A small, fragile beginning, but a real one. When my year in Florence ended, I returned home with a completed research project, a network of international colleagues, and a job offer from a small but respected museum. I accepted the job and moved into a charming apartment near the museum. Grandpa was there to help me move in, along with Michael and David and a handful of friends. As we carried boxes up the stairs, I looked around at these people who had become my chosen family, and I felt grateful for every hard thing I had been through because it had led me here. "This is nice," Grandpa said, looking around the empty apartment. "Real hardwood floors. Good light. You've done well for yourself, kiddo." "Thanks to you," I said. "No," he corrected, as he always did. "Thanks to you. I just gave you a tool. You built the life." Over the following months, I settled into my new job. I curated exhibitions, wrote articles, gave tours to groups of school children whose eyes lit up when I explained the stories behind the paintings. I made enough money to live comfortably, to save, to help others when they needed it. I had dinner with my parents occasionally now. It was still awkward sometimes, still painful in ways that might never fully heal. But we were trying. My mother was genuinely working on herself, going to therapy, reading books about parenting and privilege and harm. My father was slower to change but making efforts. My brothers and I grew closer. We had frank conversations about privilege and family dynamics, and what it meant that they had benefited from my loss. It was uncomfortable but necessary. "I'm paying it forward," David told me one day. "I can't give you back those years, but I can help other people the way I was helped. I've been mentoring kids from low-income backgrounds, helping them apply for scholarships, navigate college admissions." "That's good," I said, and I meant it. 3 years after that birthday dinner at Romano's, I visited Grandpa on another birthday. His health had declined slightly, and he moved a bit slower now, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and his heart still full of love. We sat in his kitchen again, drinking coffee again, the morning light filtering through the windows just like it had so many times before. "I've been thinking," he said, "about legacy. About what we leave behind." "You've left plenty behind," I assured him. "You built a successful business. You raised a family. You've helped so many people." "Maybe," he said. "But I think my real legacy might be you, me. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something meaningful. You could have become bitter, angry, consumed by what was done to you. Instead, you chose to grow, to help others, to build a life based on your values rather than on resentment. That's the legacy I'm proudest of. Not the money I made, but the granddaughter who showed me what real strength looks like." I felt tears spilling down my cheeks. I learned it from you, Grandpa. You're the one who believed I was worth investing in. And you proved me right, he said, smiling. Over and over again, you proved me right. We sat together in comfortable silence, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal and the recovery, the pain and the healing, the loss and the rebuilding. I thought about the trust fund and what it had really meant. Not just money, though that mattered, but also belief, investment, the message that someone thought I deserved a good future. That message had sustained me even when I didn't know the money existed. And when I finally got access to what remained, I been able to use it in ways that mattered, ways that aligned with my values. I thought about my parents and the complicated process of forgiveness. I didn't excuse what they had done, but I was learning to understand it, to see them as flawed humans who had made terrible choices while believing they were doing the right thing. I thought about my brothers, who had benefited from my loss but were working now to acknowledge that privilege and use it for good. I thought about my friends, who had supported me through everything, who had shown me that wealth comes in many forms and the richest life is one filled with love and purpose. And I thought about myself, about who I had been and who I was becoming. The struggling student working 2 jobs was still part of me, but so was the scholar who had studied in Florence. The girl who ate ramen for dinner was still there, but so was the woman who could now choose what she wanted to eat. The person who had been betrayed by her parents coexisted with the person who was learning to forgive. All of it was true. All of it was me. What are you thinking about? Grandpa asked. Everything, I said. The past 3 years. Everything that happened, everything I learned. And what did you learn? I thought carefully before answering. I learned that people are complicated, that good people can do harmful things, that forgiveness is a process, not a destination. I learned that strength comes from facing hard truths, not from avoiding them. I learned that community matters more than money, though having enough money to meet your needs matters too. I learned that I'm more resilient than I thought. And I learned that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is to live a life that proves them wrong. Grandpa smiled. That's wisdom right there. I had a good teacher, I said. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the trust fund one more time. $3,400,000. A fortune that I never got to fully access, that was stolen from me by the people who should have protected. And yet, somehow I had ended up rich anyway. Rich in experiences and relationships and self-knowledge, rich in purpose and passion and the ability to make a difference, rich in all the ways that actually matter. The money would have been nice, and I wouldn't pretend otherwise. But what I had gained through the process of losing it and fighting to recover what I could was more valuable than I ever could have anticipated. I had gained myself, my true self, tested and proven and strong, and that, I realized, was the real trust fund Grandpa had given me. Not the money, though that was part of it, but the belief that I deserved good things, the knowledge that I was worth investing in, the understanding that my value wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval or support. That trust fund would never run out. It would never be stolen. It was mine forever, and I would use it to build a life worth living. I smiled as I pulled into my parking space, grateful for the journey that had brought me here, painful as it had been. I had started this story asking what trust fund. Now I understood that there had always been a trust fund. It just wasn't the one anyone expected. It was the trust I had learned to place in myself, the fund of strength and resilience I had built through hardship. And unlike money in a bank account, no one could ever take that away. That was the gift Grandpa had really given me, and I would spend the rest of my life showing him it had been worth it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it touched your heart or made you think about family, forgiveness, and what really matters in life, I'd be grateful if you could hit that like button and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Please subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, kindness, and the unexpected ways life teaches us what we're made of. and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately made you stronger? How do you balance forgiveness with protecting yourself? Your stories and insights mean the world to me. Thank you again for being here.